The first sign that something had gone wrong came on a Tuesday. Chen Tao was standing in front of the factory's old vending machine, his hands resting on the cold glass. He was staring at the choices, deliberating in that mind-numbing way people do when they know they should eat healthy but just can't resist the allure of salty snacks. A protein bar? Too dry. Chips? Maybe. His stomach growled, reminding him that it didn't matter what he chose, he was hungry either way. Then the rat appeared. It scurried out from the shadows behind a crate, its tiny feet tapping against the concrete floor. Normally, in a factory like this, rats were a dime a dozen. No one would bat an eye. But this was different. Tao froze mid-motion, his hand still on the button of the vending machine. The world felt louder. The air seemed to thicken, as if the space between him and the rat was suddenly amplified by some force he couldn't explain. He could hear its heartbeat, rapid, panicked, fast like a ticking clock. His breath quickened. Instincts, hunger, ferocity, something primal, suddenly surged through him. He felt his muscles tense, his legs itching to move. He wanted to chase. His eyes locked onto the little creature, and he could feel every twitch, every slight movement in its fur. He could smell it, sweat, oil, the musty scent of damp earth. His pupils dilated, his vision focusing so sharply that the rat's every detail was now like a high-definition movie on fast-forward. Time stretched. The rat froze, its beady eyes meeting his. And for a brief, terrifying moment, it felt like the universe had contracted to this single, heart-stopping point. Tao's hands clenched into fists. Every nerve in his body screamed for action. But then, with a sudden burst of speed, the rat darted away, disappearing into the shadows. Tao blinked. The spell broke. The noise of the factory floor rushed back, the smell of oil and metal, the hum of machinery, the conversations in the background. His pulse was racing. He stood there for a moment, confused, out of breath, his mind trying to make sense of what had just happened. A rat. Nothing more. And yet, something inside of him had shifted. Something had stirred, something dark, something hungry. His hand still hovered over the vending machine. Chips or protein bar? The question seemed insignificant now. The hunger gnawed at him, but it wasn't the kind of hunger for food. It was something deeper. Something raw. The next few days passed in a blur of unease. Tao tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered, like a shadow dogging his every step. He was a factory worker, a simple man, nothing special. He hadn't asked for anything extraordinary in life. But a year ago, everything had changed. He'd volunteered for the genetic enhancement program on a whim. The promise of becoming stronger, faster, smarter, who wouldn't want that? It had been experimental, yes, but the benefits were undeniable. The company had offered a free trial of sorts, genetic editing to enhance physical abilities. At first, the results had been astonishing. His eyesight had sharpened to the point where he could read a menu across the room without glasses. His reflexes were faster, his strength beyond what anyone would expect of a man his size. He could lift a 100-pound crate with ease. He could run faster than he ever had in his youth. He was better. It was like magic. Or maybe something darker than magic. But now, he wasn't so sure. It had started small. The increased sensitivity, his hearing, his sense of smell. At first, it was almost a novelty. He could hear the faintest rustle of leaves outside his window, or the distant chirping of birds when there were no birds around. He could smell the faintest hint of perfume on a woman walking past him on the street, or the metallic tang of a nearby car's exhaust. Little things. But then the little things grew. He began hearing the pulse of his own blood, echoing in his ears like the thud of a distant drum. At night, he'd wake to the sound of his heart beating, so loud, so insistent. His skin would itch, and his muscles would twitch with an energy he couldn't quite control. He didn't know what to make of it. What had started as an advantage, his new abilities, was beginning to feel like a curse. It was Wednesday, and Tao found himself once again standing outside his company's main office, staring up at the glass and steel tower. His heart was racing. But this time, it wasn't from the enhancements. No, it was something else. Something more terrifying. He'd come to see Mr. Wang, the CEO. It had been a long time since they'd had any serious conversations, but Tao had earned a reputation in the factory. He'd turned heads, impressed the right people, and had been promoted to lead a small team. He was no longer just an ordinary worker. But today, he wasn't here to impress anyone. He had questions. Questions that needed answers. The lobby was sleek, clean, minimalist. A few employees sat at their desks, chatting in hushed voices, heads down. Tao was used to it by now. The sterile silence of the corporate world didn't faze him anymore. He was just another cog in the machine. Except, today, he wasn't. Mr. Chen, a receptionist called, glancing up from her phone. Mr. Wang is waiting for you in his office. Tao nodded and moved toward the elevator. It took him up to the top floor, the world below shrinking with each passing second. The glass walls revealed a panoramic view of the city, a sprawling mass of steel and concrete that seemed to stretch on forever. Mr. Wang's office was as imposing as the rest of the building. Dark wood, polished furniture, a large desk, and floor-to-ceiling windows. Wang stood by the window, his back to Tao. He was always so formal, so calculated. "Chen Tao," he said, his voice smooth but with an undercurrent of something that felt like distance. "What brings you up here today?" Tao's throat was dry. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words felt stuck. It was hard to explain. "I think something's wrong," Tao finally blurted out. "With the experiment." "With me?" Wang didn't turn to face him, but Tao could feel the weight of the man's gaze. "You've done well. We're pleased with your results." "I'm not talking about the results," Tao snapped, his voice rising without his control. "I'm talking about the changes. The side effects. I don't feel right." Wang turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "You've experienced changes? The enhancements we implemented were designed for human optimization, Chen Tao. You're better now. You must know that. These feelings you're describing, they're more than feelings," Tao interrupted. "I can hear everything. Smell things I shouldn't. And the rage. I can't control it anymore." Mr. Wang's eyes narrowed. "What exactly are you trying to say?" "I think I'm losing control. I feel different. Animal. Like I'm not human anymore." Wang's lips twitched in something between a smile and a frown. "There's always a price for power, Tao. You're not the first to feel disoriented after the procedure. But you will adapt. The animal instincts are a side effect. They're temporary." "Temporary?" Tao repeated, his pulse quickening. "What if they're not? What if they take over?" Wang sighed. "Listen, I've heard it all before. The hunger, the aggression, the sensory overload. It's all part of the process. You'll adjust." But Tao didn't feel convinced. There was something about Wang's response that seemed too rehearsed, too dismissive. Tao wanted answers. Real answers. As he left the office, his mind raced. Was Wang telling the truth? Or was there something more sinister at play? The next morning, Tao went to see Dr. Li, a former researcher from the lab that had developed the genetic treatments. He'd been the one who'd warned him about the risks before Tao had signed up for the procedure. The doctor's office was quiet, the sterile smell of antiseptic lingering in the air. "Chen Tao," Dr. Li said with a frown as he opened the door. "What brings you here? I thought you were doing well." "I need your help," Tao said, his voice low. "Something's wrong. I think I'm losing myself." Dr. Li paused, his eyes darkening. I feared this day would come. The enhancements, while they've made you stronger, faster, more intelligent, they've also altered your brain chemistry. Your primal instincts are fighting to take control. The gene editing wasn't perfect. You're experiencing the hunter effect. It's not just physical, it's mental. You're not just more powerful, you're more animal. Tao felt his heart skip a beat. The hunter effect. Was this really happening? Was he becoming something else entirely? There is a way to reverse it, Dr. Li continued, but it's dangerous. The cure involves suppressing the genetic enhancements, but doing so might leave you weak. It's a risk. Tao swallowed hard. I'll do whatever it takes. Chen Tao didn't sleep that night. The air in his apartment felt thick, heavy with the unrelenting tension that had built inside him. Every sound was magnified, the hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of his bed sheets as he shifted. His senses felt like they were being stretched taut, like a bowstring ready to snap. His thoughts raced, darting between fear and desperation, between the growing need to rid himself of whatever he had become, and the terrifying possibility that it was already too late. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the beast within him that seemed to wake more with each passing hour. The primal urges were getting stronger, clearer, more insistent. His heartbeat echoed in his ears, and his breath grew shallow. He could feel his body itching, twitching, as though it was not entirely his own. What did it mean to lose control? To feel like a stranger inside your own skin. The worst part was that he didn't know what would happen next. He could feel the edges of his humanity slipping away, his thoughts becoming erratic and jagged, his impulses more violent. What if he could never go back to the man he had been before? What if the enhancements had changed him permanently, made him something that could never fit into the world again, and if he didn't stop it, if he couldn't stop it, what would he become? The next morning, Tao woke with a start, drenched in sweat. The room was bathed in soft light, the sun filtering through the blinds. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. His chest was tight, and his stomach churned. He needed to move, to do something, anything. His muscles ached, and his mind was clouded, buzzing with a barely contained need to escape the suffocating grip of his thoughts. He grabbed his phone and dialed Dr. Li. The line rang several times before the doctor's voice finally picked up, groggy and impatient. Chen Tao? What's happened? You didn't sleep, did you? Tao swallowed hard. No. I can't. I don't know what's happening to me. Every second feels like I'm slipping further away from myself. I need to find the cure, Dr. Li. You have to help me. There was a long pause on the other end, followed by the sound of paper shuffling. Listen to me, Tao, Dr. Li said, his voice sharp. You need to calm down. Panicking won't help. The cure is dangerous, but you can't wait any longer. The longer you wait, the harder it will be to reverse. You need to come to the lab. I'll explain everything. Tao hung up without another word and left the apartment in a haze. His mind was scattered, the world around him moving too fast, too loud, too real. He wanted to run until his legs gave out, until his mind could finally settle. But there was no time for that. He had to go to the lab. Had to find the antidote before whatever was inside him completely took over. The streets felt alien as he walked, his senses flaring with every footstep. The sharp scent of exhaust from the cars, the crunch of leaves beneath his shoes, the distant laughter of children, it all hit him at once, too much to process. He couldn't ignore it. He didn't know how to shut it out. He reached the lab in record time. It wasn't far, but the distance had felt like miles, his thoughts a blur. He was barely aware of his surroundings anymore, walking as if in a daze, his body moving on autopilot, driven by something deeper. Dr. Li was waiting for him at the entrance, his face drawn, his eyes tired. It was clear he'd been up for a long time. Tao, Dr. Li said, his voice soft but firm. You need to listen to me carefully. The antidote isn't a simple fix. It's a suppression serum, a formula that can block the animal instincts, but it will come at a cost. What cost? Tao demanded, his patience fraying. He could feel the heat in his veins, the primal need to lash out. He didn't want to hear another word of caution. He didn't care what it took, as long as he could stop this. The serum suppresses the genetic alterations in your body. It will remove the heightened abilities, the instincts. But it could also strip you of everything. Your strength, your speed. Your senses will return to normal, but so will your fragility. Your body will be weaker. Your mind will be less sharp. Tao's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could hear the words, but they didn't make sense. He wasn't interested in weakness. He wasn't interested in losing the gifts the procedure had given him, so, I lose it all, he said bitterly. I lose everything, and I'm just a regular guy again. But if I don't take it, I'll become a monster. Dr. Li nodded. It's the only choice, Tao. There's no middle ground. You either learn to control this, or you suppress it entirely. But you can't live in both worlds. Not for long. Tao took a deep breath, staring at the lab's sterile walls. He could feel the beast inside him, pacing like a caged animal. He wanted to let it out. He wanted to let it run wild. But the fear gnawed at him. He had seen what happened to others in the experiment, people who had lost control, who had let the animal instincts consume them. And he couldn't shake the image of the rat from days ago. He had almost hunted it. What would happen if he didn't stop now? The decision felt like a weight on his chest. There was no way out. Not anymore. Give me the serum, he said, his voice low, almost defeated. Doctor Li led him to a small examination room in the back of the lab. The air inside was cool, the sterile scent of chemicals lingering in the corners. Tao's pulse raced, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. His mind was already spinning. Would this cure work? Would it really stop the animal inside him, or would it just make him weak, vulnerable? The doctor handed him a small vial filled with a dark liquid. It shimmered ominously under the fluorescent lights. Tao's stomach churned. Are you sure? Dr. Li asked again, his eyes searching Tao's face for any sign of hesitation. This is a one-time treatment. Once you take it, there's no going back. Tao didn't answer. He just took the vial, unscrewed the cap, and tilted it to his lips. The liquid burned like fire as it slid down his throat, hot and bitter, searing its way through his body. His vision blurred. He gasped, feeling a cold sweat break out across his skin. The world around him felt like it was spinning, the edges of his senses retreating, dimming, as if he were being pulled from one reality into another, and then it hit, the world went still. For a moment, Tao thought he had passed out. But then his mind cleared. The chaos of his senses dulled. The humming in his ears subsided. His vision, which had once been razor-sharp, returned to normal. He could hear the sound of his own breath, steady and slow, and the faint buzz of the lights above. He opened his eyes and exhaled a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The change was subtle, but it was undeniable. His heart no longer hammered in his chest, no longer felt like it might burst from the sheer force of adrenaline. His mind was calmer, quieter. The beast inside him had receded. But so had the sharpness, the edge that had made him better. His vision was no longer clear as daylight, his reflexes no longer lightning fast. Tao felt human again, but at what cost? Did it work? He asked, his voice hoarse. Doctor Li studied him carefully, then nodded. It worked. You're back to normal, Tao. Your enhancements have been suppressed. You're free from the hunter effect. But remember what I said, you're not invincible anymore. Your body is weaker, your senses, dimmer. Tao nodded, but the words didn't sink in. He didn't feel stronger. He didn't feel like himself, either. He felt empty. Like a part of him had been erased. I don't know if I can go back to the way things were, he murmured. Dr. Lee's expression softened. You don't have to go back to anything. You're still you. Just different. Tao didn't know how long he wandered the streets after leaving Dr. Lee's lab. Hours, maybe. Time had a way of slipping by when you weren't paying attention, especially when the weight of your own thoughts pressed down on you like an iron vice. The evening air had a crispness to it, the sharp bite of winter not far off, and yet Tao felt nothing. No chill, no heat, just nothing. His world had changed, but now he wasn't sure what to make of it. The surge of animal instinct, the razor-sharp senses, the hunger, it was all gone, replaced by an eerie calm. He could hear the faint clinking of cans in a nearby trash bin, the distant hum of an engine revving, but none of it stirred him like it used to. The clarity, the precision, it was all dimmed now, like an old television losing its signal. Maybe this was what it felt like to be human. To be normal. But Tao couldn't shake the feeling that the man he had been before the procedure was gone, too. The regular worker, the simple guy who had no reason to seek greatness. That version of him was slipping away into the background, his memories fading like old photographs. He stopped by the edge of the park, where the city lights flickered through the branches of skeletal trees. The park was quiet, almost empty except for a few stragglers taking late-night walks or sitting on the benches. A gentle wind stirred the leaves around him, but Tao barely noticed. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the urge to run. He didn't need to keep moving, didn't need to push himself harder, faster, stronger. He could feel the weight of his own body as it was now, slower, weaker. But it wasn't a relief. It was a loss. His hand hovered over his phone, hesitating as he thought of Dr. Lee. The doctor's words were still in his mind, "You're free from the hunter effect." But what did that even mean? Was he truly free? Or had he simply lost his edge? The park lights flickered again, and Tao turned, sensing a change in the air, a subtle shift that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. A rustling in the bushes. A low, throaty growl. Tao froze. His body didn't respond the way it used to. His instincts didn't kick in right away. For a moment, he felt utterly vulnerable, exposed. The animal that had once been a part of him, the one that used to sharpen his senses, make him hyper-aware of danger, was gone. He had no immediate reaction. No lightning-fast reflexes to keep him safe. Then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged. It was tall, dark, a silhouette against the soft moonlight. Tao's heart rate picked up, but not from fear. No, it was a different kind of adrenaline, the kind that came from being caught between two worlds, the human, and the one where he no longer belonged. "Who's there?" Tao called out, his voice low and steady despite the pounding in his chest. The figure stepped closer, revealing a face that was disturbingly familiar, too familiar. "Chen Tao," the man said with a sly grin. "I've been looking for you." Tao's stomach churned. The voice was like an echo in his mind. He had heard it before. But where? Who was this man? The stranger's face shifted into a mocking smile. "Don't you remember me?" Tao's breath caught. His pulse hammered in his ears as the memories surged, raw and unfiltered. The man standing before him wasn't just some stranger. He was someone from the lab, someone who had been part of the experiment. The other subject. The one who had gone wrong, who had broken under the weight of the enhancements. "You're him," Tao muttered, finally recognizing him. "You were the one." They lost control. The man's eyes gleamed with dark satisfaction. "You finally figured it out." "Yes. I was part of the trial too. But unlike you, I didn't let them suppress the enhancements. I embraced them. I let the animal take over." Tao's body stiffened. You're the reason they stopped the trials. You killed people." The man shrugged, his grin widening. "The experiment was never about saving people, Tao. It was about control. Power. The truth is, I was more than human. I still am. And you, my friend, you're still holding back. You think suppressing the animal instincts will make you stronger? You're wrong. You've cut yourself off from your real power. You're weak. Tao's hands balled into fists, his mind racing. It was happening again, that feeling. The surge of heat, the primal desire to fight. But this time, there was something different. The urge to pounce, to chase, to overpower, it wasn't in his mind. It was in his body. In his muscles, in his blood. He fought to control it. You're wrong, Tao said through gritted teeth, his voice barely audible. I didn't give in to the monster. I won't. The man chuckled darkly, stepping closer. You've already lost, Tao. The moment you accepted their gift, you gave up your humanity. The beast is always going to be there, waiting to take over. It's only a matter of time before it consumes you. Tao could feel his heart thudding in his chest now, the sensation of his blood boiling as his hands trembled with a new energy. The animal instincts were there, closer than ever. He didn't know if he could hold it back this time. His vision sharpened, the world around him growing vivid with detail, the sounds louder, more pressing. Every muscle in his body screamed to run, to attack. But Tao knew what would happen if he let go. He would lose himself. He would become that. The figure, sensing Tao's hesitation, lunged. In an instant, Tao's body reacted. But it wasn't just his body, it was his mind, too. He was no longer the man who had accepted the antidote. He wasn't the animal either. He was somewhere in between. It was a strange kind of power, an awareness of both worlds, both strengths. The years of factory work, of training, of physical labor, coupled with the dangerous enhancements. Tao sidestepped the man's attack effortlessly, using the speed and precision he had once taken for granted. With a single move, he grabbed the man's arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing him to the ground, but in the moment before the strike, Tao hesitated. He felt the violence inside him, the hunger to finish it, to destroy this man who had been the first to lose control. But he fought it. You're wrong, Tao repeated, his voice a growl, a battle cry. I am not you. I am not the monster. The man groaned in pain, struggling beneath Tao's grip, but Tao tightened his hold just enough to make him listen. You can fight it, Tao said, his voice shaking with both rage and control. I've been there. I know what it feels like. But you can't let it win. The man laughed weakly, his grin still present, though strained. You think you've won, Tao? You think you've beaten it? You're just like me. We're both the same. You can't change what's inside you. Tao let out a breath, closing his eyes for just a moment. The fight was over. But the battle wasn't won. Not yet. The sound of sirens in the distance brought him back to reality. Tao stood, stepping away from the man, whose body was already weakening. He could feel the animal instincts still simmering inside him, threatening to break free again. He wasn't sure how long it would take before he could control it, truly control it, forever. But at least, for tonight, he was in control. The sirens grew louder, and Tao knew it was time to go. Time to disappear. The curse of the hunter was something you could never outrun, no matter how far you tried to run, but maybe, just maybe, Tao had learned how to survive it.